Hello, everybody. We have Jayant today, who is the staking and infrastructure lead at Mantra and also sits on the council of the Mantra DAO. Jayant is probably one of the most knowledgeable infrastructure people that I know in my circle. And welcome, Jayant. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Sid, thanks so much for having me and for saying such nice things. Probably because we're recording, I think.
No.
It's
Yeah,
great
definitely.
It's great to be here, Sid. Like, I remember when we first started chatting, it was about should you get into this space or not? And then it's gone on to building out tokenomics, which honestly, we've used some of the work that you've done and the Excel models and that you put out there with the research. So really liking the content you're putting out there and super happy to be here on this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. That actually warms my heart. But yeah. So, Giant, context for this is there are many founders building out protocols in the Web3 ecosystem today. And we know that a core part of building out a protocol is also building out that Validator ecosystem, the RPC node ecosystem that is there. So there is a cold start problem here. For many founders, early founders. There are two ways in which they can go. Either they can go by running a validator ecosystem on their own, which is very, very cost heavy. Or there's a second one, which is to go with providers. So how do you think a protocol founder should look at solving this cold start problem?
Okay, so in the way that it's phrased, I think like whatever I say is going to instigate arguments about what is the best way forward. But I'll tell you everything from here onwards is my opinion. So if you disagree with it while watching this, please feel free to and let me know. We can have a proper conversation. Now, for people and that are actually trying to build out protocols out there and trying to create a validator ecosystem, I think before we get to that, let's just take one step back and then take a look at what is a product, like what is a blockchain at its essence? It's a database, right? So when you have a validator out there, you want these people to be responsible actors that are going to help you validate transactions and ensure like one of the key features, which is immutability of a blockchain, is maintained. So you want validators that are responsible. So the same way in traditional finance, you would have institutions that have a fiduciary responsibility towards the client's money that they're holding, and they're responsible for what happens with it. Validators have a similar responsibility, but all of this is verified on chain. So a validator like needs to be responsible. They need to be someone that a user of that protocol is comfortable staking with, because you have to like put real money on the line. There is economic value to trust that is being put over here. And in addition to that, they also need to understand that blockchains and crypto need to run 24/7. So there has to be a core level of competence in being able to run this infrastructure nonstop, rather than have it shut down and then people do 6 hours of due diligence to try and figure out the problem. And then they do another 12 hours of that to try and figure out how to fix it. There needs to be near instant turnaround times for validators to be able to fix issues. Sometimes they just happen. So how do you resolve those issues? So uptime, trust, and competence in running infrastructure. I think these are the three things that any founder of a protocol should look at. In terms of the next part of the question, which is like, should I be looking at a centralized service provider, or should I be looking at validator infrastructure as a provider, or should I be trying to encourage it as an individual or a set of individuals that are running each of these validators out there? So depending on the type of protocol, and all of this, like before we even get into it, all of this is only for proof of stake chains. So if anyone is looking to figure out how to become a miner in Bitcoin, this is not a conversation. And now with Ethereum having moved to proof of stake, it becomes even more relevant, because suddenly since the 15th of September, the market cap of proof of stake tokens has gone up by $200 billion officially. So that's a significant amount of capital that is included in this space. So Ethereum, let's just talk about three different types of blockchains right now. Okay, so Ethereum is one of the decentralized maxis favorite blockchains out there, in terms of everyone wants to have your own validator. each validator is designed in such a way that it is built to cater for one person or one organization running it, just one validator. But then the flip side of that is staking on Ethereum is so complicated that a normal novice user of, or even someone that understands technology will find it extremely difficult to set up a full history node, or to be able to get their existing validator up to sync, because they have to get it from somewhere, right? And then you've got like terabytes of data that are sitting somewhere that you have to sync the entire thing. Now, this is something Ethereum is working on solving, but then validators have to be able to get all of that data and then be able to start validating blocks on Ethereum. And then just setting up the entire process is difficult. On the other part, you've got, let's say, Tendermint or IBC related chains, like Cosmos Hub chains, right? So Cosmos has made it very simple in terms of, here is one standard SDK, go launch a blockchain. Who your validators are, they just need to be able to run the Cosmos code. And if they're able to do it in a particular way, they get some rewards that you're distributing from the chain. It's fairly straightforward. So that is a little bit easier for individuals to do. But then that the barrier to entry in like the Cosmos ecosystem is that you have something called an active set, which means you need to have a certain amount of capital behind your validator to be able to get into that active set. Then you've got the third variety, which is like Solana. Let's take that, for example. Okay, Solana is a fast finality, high frequency trader go-to option for a lot of activity because block finality is fast. But now Solana, the way it functions is that it has highly intensive hardware requirements, in that a normal user will need to shell out a lot of cash to be able to get the hardware needed to run a Solana node. And if you want to run it as a validator, every epoch, which I think is roughly every 24 to 48 hours or so on Solana, requires you to sign up as a validator. I need to pay one Solana into the network every epoch, which basically means I need to be paying about a couple of hundred SOL every year just to run the validator, with no promise of who will come and stake and what are the commissions going to be, right? And can I recover my costs? So the barrier to entry here is money and how much you're able to get over there, and like hardware itself. So from any, depending on the blockchain you have, like you have to be able to solve for which one of these problems you're looking at, right? Are you solving for ease of access to the masses out there? In which case, Ethereum has ease of access, is accessible to the masses, but then they've like capped themselves because it's not so easy to stake. Then you've got the Cosmos IBC ecosystem, which is very easy to access, but then depending on where you get the tokens from, it's again difficult to get into the active set. Then you've got Solana and the likes of that, which is very easy to set up, but then it's extremely expensive to run. So depending on what type of problem you're solving for, you're going to have to figure out who are the types of people that you want. And at each and every single one of these problems that I've described to you across the 3 different blockchains is that as an individual, there are obstacles to entry into each one of these. So if you're trying to develop a multi-chain validator ecosystem, as an individual, it is extremely difficult to be able to overcome tech capability, monetary obstacles, and data hardware requirements. So at this point in time, like, so at Mantra Nodes, which I'm operating over here, we've been running it as our own proprietary technology for the longest time for validators that we operate. But then as we've started, people have been reaching out to us saying that we don't know how to run a validator. Would you be able to run one for us? So that's where it becomes that there are individuals that can try and do it, but then it's extremely time consuming and you don't know whether it's going to succeed or not. Whereas you have other institutions that have figured out how to monetize this space and have their processes and they have the people in place to be able to develop and deliver. So for a protocol founder, if speed is of the essence, then you would want to go to a reputable service provider to be able to get you to have that trust in your ecosystem that we were talking about earlier. On the other hand, if you say that I am a decentralization maxi, I'm going to wait till the end of the decade till I can achieve that. In cases like that, then you just have to be patient and play with time. So it comes down to, in the cold start problem, what is the engine we're trying to start? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And depending on what problem we're trying to solve, there's a different approach that we could potentially take for it. It was a bit of a long, winding answer, but does that answer the question?
No, yeah, definitely. That is actually quite a decent mental model people can follow. So if you're looking to solve something really fast, really quick, maybe you're you raised a round and you maybe need to answer to investors, then going with a service provider would also make is going to make sense. And now, which brings me to my next question, right? There are so many service providers, and I think a majority of the founders to solve that cold start problem will have to go with a provider. Now, with the number of providers out there, and I am cognizant of the fact that what a service provider actually provides is like the needs of the founders has to be in line with what they're providing. But what are some non-negotiables? What are some high level? What are things to watch out for when you are evaluating infrastructure service provider like an Infura or a Mantra or Ring?
Yep, that's a good question. So anytime we're looking at any service providers, or we're looking at how best we can provide our services to anyone, a couple of things that every founder, protocol, institution that is dealing with anything infrastructure related needs to look at is security and key management of a validator. I can't stress this enough, that proper key management systems for validators are still in the process of being developed. There are no industry standards out there at this point in time. So one of the things is, if you're trying to trust your tokens and your blockchain with a particular service provider, the question to ask is, how do you manage your keys? Depending on the response that you get, and that is going to tell you everything you need for how well it's set up or how well the people behind the service are thinking about it. Now, key management, when I'm talking about it, it's not about your particular wallet management over here. It's about the validator keys that we're talking about, right? And all validator keys are slightly different. So ETH does it different, Sol does it different, Atom does it differently. But what is absolutely common across all of them is that these validator keys, if they are compromised, it's essentially giving away your banking password, your corporate banking password, to somebody else out there, right? And one thing that can happen is this is what most founders would not want to, nobody would want to have, is that your money goes, or somebody scams you out of your reward tokens, or something of that happens that compromises the economic value of your validator. Now, as a founder that is actively setting up governance, on-chain governance, the bigger problem, and I think this is probably going to be something that comes up only in the next 2 to 5 years. It's not a pressing, burning issue at this point in time, because on-chain governance isn't as robust as it could be. But imagine a situation somewhere down the line that somebody has validator keys that they've gotten access to. They haven't made it evident in any way by not touching the funds. A vote is put up that is going to absolutely decimate the tokenomics for everybody other than that validator. For example, I don't know this situation actually happened. I'm just randomly thinking of one. Now, this validator has the ability to vote on that proposal and push it across the line by essentially hitting a quorum and exceeding the amount required. And this proposal is coded on chain, which means nobody has the ability to stop it if it passes. Now, this is more dangerous to me than the economic impact alone, because you can make money again, but you can't take back macroeconomic decisions that have been made once they have been made, right? So absolutely. Validator key security is critical. The other one is what jurisdictions that they operate in, because regulation is coming. FATF has like recent regulations as to virtual asset service providers. Every regulator in the world is looking at it and interpreting it slightly differently. So where if a protocol founder is looking at validator service providers, it's always good to know what jurisdiction that they operate in, which ones do they have their servers in, because all of these things may not matter in the DeFi crypto ecosystem, but we still live in a physical world that cares about these things. So we should also care about those. Then the third aspect is that you want to look at how do they run their server infrastructure. So a lot of people out there would probably go out and set up their validator on, say, a Google Cloud or a Microsoft Azure or an AWS, for example. But all of these rely on centralized Web2 service providers. Nothing wrong with it. They have like enough of their own redundancies in place. But if the protocol founder wants something, for example, that is absolutely decentralized and off the traditional grid, that has no oversight, for example, then it's probably better to find out, does this service provider have like a standalone data center somewhere? What is the manner in which this data center operates? Who are the service providers over there? So it's either like a cloud computing, or if it's a bare metal approach, if it's a hybrid, how does that work? Where do the keys sit? What is the key security process? These are some of the things that they need to look at. An additional part is that as a service provider, from my perspective, I would also ask the founders as to what is the path to decentralization? Is there a path to decentralization? And are slashing and economic incentives being baked into the chain on day one or not? So the reason I would ask these questions to protocol founders is that if there is a path to decentralization, then that means that the protocol founder wants the validators to get together and come up with decisions for the chain. If that happens, then you don't just want somebody that's running a data center for you. You want someone that has like the mental ability or the capability to figure out how is the best way to mold this ecosystem into a economically profitable center. So a lot of, and all of this I'm talking about is like 5 to 10 years down the line. It's not happening at this point in time. The second thing I would want to find out about the path to decentralization, and if there is one, there are certain applications that are being built on blockchains that require some level of regulation, which means that those validators will be decentralized to a certain extent, in that there is no collusion of data that is possible. But there probably will always be a central authority or some sort of multi-sig or some sort of council that sits on top that governs certain economic decisions. What is the inflation rate going to be? How the tokens distributed? What happens in which kind of these situations? And I absolutely get that, because every blockchain is trying to solve for a different problem. So if that is the case, then you're looking for someone that is just going to run the data, that's just going to run a server data center for you. And then in return, you get blocks being mined effectively. So that's fine. That's depends on what they're looking for. And the last part that I mentioned about slashing and economic incentives. Obviously, like as a validator, I want to be able to cover my costs. So they have to be able to ensure that the tokenomics, because all validators are paid out in the native token. So it's a bit of a punt sometimes if it's just about break even, because the cost of running servers is still in, like, let's say US dollars, because it's a global reserve currency still of the traditional finance world. So I have to be able to pay the US dollars. What are the tokenomics going to be like? How do I get the rewards? Is it feasible? If it is not feasible, how are the foundations or the protocol founders incentivizing people to make it profitable? Meaning, like, there's usually a protocol treasury with a token that has been launched. Are they going to use that to stake to these? That way it gives you more commissions that validators can charge. So these are all things that they need to look at. And the final part about it, which is actually related to slashing. And slashing is events where a validator makes a mistake, in that it either maliciously signs a transaction or it is just down for a very long period of time, thereby compromising part of the ecosystem. So the reason I say this is that if validators don't perform their duty the same way that they're economically incentivized to perform their duty, that allows people to get into the system that will never leave. And you want that churn to happen, so that always it's the best service providers that rise to the top and everybody else with us. So these are important things to keep in mind, and that slashing and decentralization and economic incentives are pretty critical parameters from a validator service provider's point of view. And slashing, it's like, I'll give you an example, just to bring it down into the real world with a real story of me. So last week, I think Solana went down for I think it went down for a couple of hours, maybe 12 hours or so. So we run a Solana validator, and my team and I were looking into what happened over there. So apparently one validator, I don't know the details out there, signed the same block twice, which essentially was a double signing exercise. So you get slashed for two reasons. You get slashed for double signing, or you get slashed for downtime. This was double signing. And because there was a double signing incident that happened, something in the code or the recent update couldn't handle it. And that's what led to an outage. Now, in situations like this, your validator should be decentralized enough that it does not affect the entire ecosystem. Or if it does affect the entire ecosystem, what are your processes? Because again, it depends on what the people behind the project are trying to achieve, right? Not everybody wants to achieve like the one particular vision. Everyone's got different flavors of it. So if something happens, how do you deal with it? You need to have like this risk procedural matrix in place as well, just to know what you need to be doing.
Understood. So it's interesting how you as a service provider ask them, the founders, about the slashing. So I can imagine the fear, but it is definitely a valid question to ask because the entire business is dependent on it. So thank you for that. Those are pretty structured points. Thank you. So now let's just quickly dive into some questions the community has actually for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Love
let
it.
me quick. The community. You might know a couple of members there, but yeah, friends of the community and community members. Yes. So we have the tweet here. I'm interviewing an infrastructure expert tomorrow on building out a validator ecosystem. What do I ask him? And first few questions actually are from Mr. Yalamanchi. Centralized indexers versus decentralized indexers like graph protocol. Should validators even get into building indexing layers, and why?
First of all, indexers are absolutely critical because without an indexer, it becomes extremely difficult for builders in the space to be able to identify data and do any sort of analytics that might be required. And getting math right, I think, is one of the fundamental things that you need to do. So indexers are extremely important. Now you've got centralized and you've got decentralized indexers. Graph protocol is one which is decentralized to a certain extent, but then that's because it lives on Ethereum. And Ethereum is the most popular blockchain out there with a couple of million or the low tens of millions active wallet addresses. So if we zoom out from that a little bit, the world has 7 billion people and there's only a few million people using the most popular blockchain out there. And even on the most popular blockchain out there, there are still a lot of things that may or may not work out. And so what I'm getting at is decentralized indexers work when there are volumes to be able to justify it. Because the graph protocol also has their own token, which means that they have their own tokenomics. So it needs to make sense from an economic perspective to be able to run a decentralized indexer. Now, if you're a cold start founder looking at a brand new protocol, you're probably going to have to stomach a centralized indexer to start off with.
Yep.
And the reason for a centralized indexer is that you want information to flow. But then if you're a brand new protocol out there that is trying to incentivize validators using native tokens, and you're trying to incentivize a decentralized indexer using native tokens, then that's extremely high inflation. And anyone that holds onto the tokens will not like to have the tokens being dumped at that mass rate. So it's easier in the beginning to have some level of control and to have that control audited as like by either an auditor or make it a public repo on GitHub so that everybody else can go and read it. If you want to just allow everyone to have eyes on it. If not, then it's centralized. It doesn't matter. You have the ability to do that. So I would say that indexers are critical. Depending on your use case, it is going to determine what type of indexer does exist out there. In fact, we've built out a few indexers as a validator on the Cosmos ecosystem and also on Polygon. One of the reasons being that we run dApps, and then the dApps that we run essentially require us to access information. That information may not be easily available through a service provider. So that's why we built it ourselves. But then if you're a smaller team out there, or if you're a person, or if you're a team of one trying to build something, you don't want to necessarily be dealing with all this heavy lifting of building an indexer. You just want to be able to access information and build the idea out. So in cases like that, it does help that validators start getting into the space a little bit more. Because if you're a validator, you know how to read the blockchain, you know how to write to the blockchain. An indexer just allows you to read the blockchain and transmit the data to somebody else that wants access to it. So in that case, like, it really helps to be able to provide that information. And validators already have the infrastructure set up. So you could have like the serverless system wherein depending on how many calls you get, like similar to Infura, for example, you pay on a subscription basis, but then you don't have to run a ETH full node to get access to historical data. So validators, I think, are in a good position to get into this space. It depends on whether they want to get into it or not.
Got it. All right, so let's move on to the next question. Should validators even get into building indexing layers, and why?
No, we got that, didn't we?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Why
So
is
I
there?
covered, I got
Yeah,
1 and 2, I think, in one.
correct. Yeah. So why is there a need for running validator businesses when chains want their individuals to run one?
Okay. So this goes back to the earlier part wherein it depends on what type of chain it is that is being built out. If Mr. Y over here says that they want individuals to run it, then that would probably be more in the mold of Ethereum, for example. But having said that, like I just want to pause over here and say that despite Ethereum now moving to proof of stake and an emphasis on decentralization, because it's difficult to run an ETH node and because it is profitable to run an ETH validator, most of the ETH validators that exist right now, I don't have the exact percentages, so please fact check me on this, but a significant more than the consensus needed for finality is run by, I think, 3 centralized organizations: Lido Finance, Kraken, and Coinbase. So now, if we've moved from every miner is decentralized towards a system wherein a validator is decentralized and we have validators that sit everywhere else. But isn't it essentially a conglomerate that is operating all of these validators behind? So I'd like to go back and say, who is the individual over here? Is Coinbase the individual, or is Coinbase's single validator the individual? So that's just throwing the question back over there, because I think like there's a philosophical battle that's currently in progress: decentralize or not, regulate or not, how to go about each one of these. So I don't have the answers, but I'm just saying that these are some debates currently in progress. And what problems do validator businesses solve? So a couple of them, I can speak only from personal experience of operating one. But the problems that we solve, like one, are access to a trusted infrastructure service provider to be able to give you like uptime and finality and ensure that it's a responsible actor with a responsibility towards its stakers. The second one is access to information to builders. So that is to the earlier question about information and indexing. And if you're a DApp builder, you don't want to do the heavy lifting of reading a chain because you may not know how to do that, or you may not be interested in wanting to do that because you just want to build one part of it. So validators help to make it a little bit more modular and composable, in that we solve one part of what DApp you're building, you solve the other part of it. And the additional part is security and operating the funds on behalf of other people out there, in that we know how to keep validator keys safe, and we know how to go about ensuring that if something were to go wrong, we have our checks and measures in place that damage is minimal to none if possible. In addition to all of this, we also have the actual economic reasons behind wanting to run a validator, right? And what are the validators solved is that there's a lot of institutional money trying to enter the proof of stake chain. Because I'll just give you the analogy, right? Like, so if you have traditional bond markets or likes of that in traditional finance, which are like low yield but stable and secure, running a proof of stake validator business is as close to the equivalent of that I can think of. Because irrespective of bull market or bear market or market complexion or macroeconomic factors, the tokenomics of a change don't change without a governance proposal. Who passes a governance proposal? Validators. Validators need to be responsible. And for being responsible, you get paid out in tokens. So the rest of crypto is trying to chop and change a fixed size of the pie by trying to get some aspect of it. A validator is out there that is essentially building value out of competence in running infrastructure. So I think that is where it really helps that validator businesses are trying to solve these problems, because within each of these industries that people are trying to get into this space, they don't want to do all of the things. So they may have the tech jobs, they might have the money, or they might have the desire for governance and proposals. Now, not one single person has the ability to meet all three of them. So you can contact a validator business and then see, I want help with this part, and that can be helped out. And because it is fairly like, it's like trying to move an elephant, right? Building out entire blockchains. By giving new founders, turnkey solutions for their validators, we're also speeding up the pace of adoption and innovation in space. So you don't have to like spend months on figuring out your validators, whereas you can just give that problem to someone else and focus on what economic problem or whatever business case you're trying to solve. So that is what I would say to the final question that he had there.
Very interesting and fairly comprehensive, right? Yeah. Thank you for that. And jumping on to the next question, should validator businesses get into MEV?
This is okay. So MEV earlier used to be minor extracted value. Now it is maximal extracted value. Should a validator get into it or not? I can't answer that. It's an ethical debate out there. Will validators get into it? Yes, because there's money to be. Okay,
Fair.
so
yeah.
I'm just giving you a heads up over there, and all of this comes down to what is our if there's a validator business, they are service providers. If there is a client that requires it for a specific reason, as long as it is within the bounds of acceptance in terms of like there's no wrongdoing or maliciousness at play, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Because there's a lot of high frequency traders out there that are just trying to get their trade in through arbitrage opportunities. So, I mean, it is going to happen whether we like it or not. Whether it should happen or not is a debate, I guess, for the entire crypto community to weigh in
on. Fair enough. But yeah, I was looking at some stats on MEV, and I think it was about 13,000 ETH per day the MEVs are making, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, it's gone from something that nobody wants to talk about that they do as a miner to everyone's very openly talking about how they are maximizing it and putting out public repos as to how you can build your own MEV bot and go about doing it as well. So exactly. From one angle, it seems like it shouldn't happen. From another angle, it's improving efficiency within the system. So, like I said, debate.
Exactly. Debate. Yes. Yes. Then, Mr. Wise, final question. Would it make sense for validators and certain dApps to join forces where the validator software optimizes for the given dApp related transactions and give them preference over others?
Oh, okay. In this case, I can think of one instance where this would make sense, and that would be in instances of app chains that are being developed. So earlier you had like entire blockchains out there that did everything DeFi related, and now with Cosmos SDKs and Polkadot parachains becoming more relevant and gaining the volumes and the trust of the public, there are specific chains that are going to exist out there that solve just a problem for one specific dApp. In instances like that, it does make sense for a validator to help that dApp because the chain is being built out for that particular application to do well. So I'll just give you like, so we're building our own blockchain as well, which is going to be an app specific chain in the slightly more regulated financial ecosystem, because we're looking at trying to bring traditional finance into the space on that part of our business. So in instances where there's DYDX, which is also bringing its dApp from Ethereum onto its own chain and Cosmos. So if dApps like DYDX that have their own chain want to join forces with validators, then it does optimize the entire process. How it optimizes it, we have to figure out, right? What is the best way to do it? Yeah, like his example, like a validator node, which is heavily optimized for Uniswap transactions. I can't remember which article, so again, please fact check me on this. There was someone out there that said a uni chain is inevitable in the next few years because most of the money that Uniswap makes as a protocol is from MEV and front running and optimized transactions. Whereas the 0.03% fees, the trading fees, only accounts for a small part of it. So at some point in time, if their focus becomes more towards recurring revenues, then they would want to move towards optimizing transactions for themselves. Because if you have such a large order book at your disposal and you're not making the most of it, then it's an opportunity, then you're leaving money on the table. So this part of it, though, I'm coming from it from a purely financial angle, not from a blockchain philosophical angle. So I think it is going to happen. In app chain.
Interesting, because I also read this article where Aave partnered with Pocket Network for as a infrastructure provider. So for someone like Pocket, with the kind of volumes Aave has, which is probably bigger than any other customer they have, do you think it makes sense for them to do something like this?
Potentially it could, because
Yeah.
if it depends on how their pricing model is, right? If they're
Hmm.
getting paid for every transaction that they mine, then you want to optimize for whoever is paying the bills to keep your lights on. So at that point
Okay.
in time,
Sure.
if you've got your largest client out there that requires the largest amount of infrastructure heavy backend systems, then
Hmm.
you would want to, I would look at it from a purely business perspective in this case. Who is your biggest client? How are you doing it? What are you doing to best service them? So that's just simply, if I were to condense it, maybe oversimplified, I guess.
Yeah.
I'd put it
Fair
that way.
enough. Yeah. It all comes down to business. Yes. And finally, Vaishak has a question. What's the average ROI of running these validator ecosystems? Again,
It
very high.
depends on
Yeah.
so many factors. It depends on so many factors. Because I'll tell you, before we get into the ROI part of it, you're getting, as a validator, you get paid in the native token of the chain that you're running.
Mhm.
Okay. So when you're getting paid in tokens, there's obviously the
Yeah.
volatility of that chain, right? So you've
Correct.
got market conditions. Then the additional thing is that you're also looking at, there are stake percentage, excuse me. There's like, depending on how much is staked to the network, there's an optimal amount. Say there's
Mhm.
66% that you want staked optimally. If the amount goes lower than that, then the inflation rate changes, which means you get paid less tokens, more tokens, that impact your ROI. All of these rates are variable. So when you're looking at ROI, you first need to figure out how much does it cost in terms of running my basic infrastructure to run a validator on this particular chain.
Mhm.
Then you work backwards, saying that if the staking yield is say X%, or let's say 10%, let's not get into algebra, is 10% and my cost is like $100, then I need to at least make 10% of the yield plus whatever commission I'm charging, depending on what the base of tokens I can charge that yield on, needs to be able to cover my $100 a month of server cost. Now, if you're not able to cover that server cost, then it doesn't make sense for you to be running a validator on that chain. So
Mhm.
the ROIs definitely make sense, because this is a business of scale and volume. Okay, you run a validator for 10 tokens, it's the same as you run a validator for a billion tokens. Okay, but then the commissions that you get paid, the validator's
Mhm.
income is through the commissions, and the commission is basically a fee that you're paying for the rewards that are being distributed to stakers in your chain. So if you have all of the infrastructure set up and you're a trusted name and more people are coming and delegating to you, the commissions that you earn are just higher. So it still
Mhm.
costs me $100 a month. But then now, if I'm making my 10% on 10% of $1 billion worth of assets, that not just covers my ROI, that is my cash ticket to short success, irrespective of token prices in bull market or bear market, if it is a semi decent project also.
Got it. Hmm. So, yeah, I think this brings us to the end of all the questions. Yeah, and there's, of course, Soumya, knowing who I'm
Calling
speaking
us out.
to. Yes, definitely. So, yeah, thank you so much for doing this, Jan. This was really enjoyable. I learned so much personally in this conversation because I'm not so deep into the infrastructure part of the whole Web3 ecosystem, but this helped me, and I'm pretty damn sure this is going to help a lot of founders because you actually gave some actionable uh, points for them to act on while evaluating maybe a service provider or how to actually go about starting that cold start problem. And also, thanks on behalf of the community for answering these questions. This was
I
actually
love being
enjoyable,
here, man.
super
Thank you
enjoyable.
so much, man. Like, the
Thank
fact that
you.
you say that means a lot to me. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for setting this up. I love talking about all things crypto and the more esoteric parts of the business, which are like infrastructure. To try and make sense of it for the community is what I'm attempting. So thank you for
Yeah.
the opportunity to be able to do that. I had a great time over here talking about all of these things that most people may not want to talk about because it might not be their cup of tea. But yeah, absolutely, man. This was a really fun time. look forward to doing it again for something else that we talk about in the future.
100%, definitely. Yes. Thank you.